They told me not to go. They said it was too dangerous. They said Gaza was a war zone, not a place for discovery. But something inside me wouldn't let it go. I had seen the headlines, the images, the statistics, but none of that touched me. None of that moved me. I had grown numb, like so many others, until I met them, one Muslim family, in the heart of Gaza. And they didn't just change my mind. They changed my heart forever. It started with the sound of children laughing. I hadn't expected that. In a city covered in dust, torn by missiles, I heard joy. Unfiltered, pure joy. That's what pulled me in. And then I saw them. Two boys kicking a flattened plastic bottle like it was a football. A young girl clapping her hands in rhythm. And a woman with the warmest smile I had ever seen, calling them in for tea like nothing in the world was wrong. But everything was wrong. Their home was missing a roof. Half of the walls were rubble. They had no electricity, no running water. The father had lost his job. Their youngest son was wounded in the leg, and yet they welcomed me, not with fear, not with bitterness, but with kindness. They didn't know me. I was just a stranger, an outsider with a camera and a notebook. But they sat me down, served me hot tea, and asked me about my family. My family. I had come to learn about them, and they were asking about me. That was the first moment something shifted inside me. I asked them how they survive. The mother, her name was Fatima, looked at me and said, "We don't just survive. We live. Because Allah's with us." Her words carried no hatred, no anger, just certainty, faith. Her husband Khalid added, "You only understand the value of peace when you live without it. You only understand the strength of love when it's the only thing you have left." I stared at him in disbelief. His leg was scarred. He had lost a brother. He had watched friends vanish in airstrikes. And yet he was teaching me about peace. That night, they invited me to stay for dinner. I hesitated. I felt guilty, taking food from a family that barely had enough for themselves. But they insisted. "To share what little we have is our blessing," Fatima said. I watched as she prepared lentils and bread over a small fire. The kids helped. They smiled the entire time. We sat on the floor and ate together. The youngest, Zain, who couldn't have been more than 5, offered me the biggest piece of bread. His hands trembled, but his eyes were full of joy. I took it, and I could barely swallow. Not because of the taste, but because of the weight of what it meant. This family, wounded and surrounded by chaos, had more humanity than I had ever seen in any so-called civilized place. After dinner, Khalid brought out a book, the Qur'an. He held it with such reverence. He said, "This is our strength. This is how we keep going. Even when the world turns away, Allah remains." He didn't preach. He didn't try to convert me. He just shared what held them together. I asked Fatima if she ever gets angry, if she ever asks why. She nodded and said, "Yes, I cry. I scream into my pillow. I break inside, but then I make dua, and I remember that this world is not the end. And in that, I find peace again." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside under the shattered sky and listened to the silence. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't run from my thoughts. I just sat and wept. The next morning, Khalid took me to the remains of the mosque that once stood nearby. It was bombed, reduced to fragments. But there on the wall, a verse of the Qur'an remained etched into the stone. It read, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." Khalid placed his hand on it and whispered, "Even now, we believe." I followed him through the neighborhood. We passed others, children playing, women hanging laundry between broken pillars, elders praying with their heads bowed to the dust. It was a scene of tragedy, yes, but it was also a scene of unimaginable resilience. And that's when I understood. Gaza isn't just a place of suffering. It's a place of strength, of spirit, of submission to a power greater than any army. That evening, the power came back for a brief moment. Just an hour. The children cheered. Zain ran in circles, yelling, "Lights! lights, and the family gathered to recite Qur'an together. Their voices harmonized in a melody so pure, I felt like I was hearing truth itself sing. I asked Khaled how he explains all this to his children. He smiled and said, "We don't teach them hate. We teach them to hope, to love, to forgive, because what they learn now will shape the future. And we believe in a future, even if we don't live to see it." That broke me. Not in a sad way, but in a sacred way, because I realized then I had been walking blind through life, complaining about small inconveniences, worrying about opinions, appearances, and temporary things. This family had lost so much, and yet they had more clarity than I ever had. The next day, I prepared to leave. I thanked them, tears in my eyes. Khaled hugged me. Fatima gave me a small woven bracelet. Zain kissed my hand and said, "Don't forget us." I promised I wouldn't. As I walked away, I looked back one last time. There they stood, smiling, waving like angels among ruins, and that image will never leave me. Since I returned home, everything has changed. I no longer complain about slow Wi-Fi or traffic. I no longer scroll past the news about Gaza with indifference. Now I see their faces, I hear their voices, and I carry their strength with me. That Muslim family in Gaza didn't just survive a war. They conquered hate with love. They met despair with faith. They answered violence with compassion. And in doing so, they showed me the essence of Islam. Not in words, but in action. I used to think faith was just a personal thing. But now I know. It's the fire that keeps a soul alive in the darkest of nights. It's the reason a mother can smile even after burying her child. It's the force that lets a father teach peace when his world is in pieces. Their faith changed my life. Their love changed my heart. And their courage taught me that sometimes the people with the least have the most to give. If you ever doubt the power of faith, remember this family. Remember their tea, their laughter, their prayers. Remember Zain's little hands offering bread. Remember the Qur'an against the broken wall. Because in Gaza, under ashes and grief, I found humanity. I found Islam. I found truth. And I will never be the same again. I came back home, but my soul remained in Gaza. It echoed with every adhan I now heard. I used to hear the call to prayer as just sound, distant, foreign. But now, it shook something inside me. I could see Zain's little eyes light up when he heard it. I could see Khaled standing up, brushing dust from his shoulders, answering it like a soldier summoned to something sacred. I could see Fatima silently wiping her hands and whispering a prayer before rising to stand before her Lord. Back in my world of comfort, excess, and noise, their simplicity haunted me in the most beautiful way. My meals tasted different, not because the ingredients changed, but because I remembered how Fatima fed her family, with dignity from next to nothing. I remembered how the children ate with joy, sharing without being told, laughing without screens, grateful for one plate between them. I remembered how we ate by candlelight, not because it was romantic, but because there was no electricity, and still it was the warmest meal I've ever had. I opened the Qur'an they gifted me, a small, worn copy. It still carried the scent of Gaza's air, the kind of smell you don't forget, half dust, half something divine. I didn't read Arabic, but I saw Fatima's handwritten note on the first page. To see truth, the eyes must be washed with tears. May your journey begin. I didn't cry then, but later, alone, I did, because I realized I hadn't come to Gaza to report. I had been brought there to be humbled. Every night since, I've been thinking of what they taught me, not with sermons, not with debates, but with how they lived. I remember how Fatima, even in pain, would rise for tahajjud. She whispered her does with such love, like she was speaking to someone who was truly listening. And that shook me, because in a world that feels so loud and chaotic, she had a secret place of silence and power. Khaled told me once, "You see, they can bomb our homes, but they can't bomb our hearts. They can destroy our buildings, but not our beliefs." And those words have stayed with me like scripture, because in them is the essence of a faith that doesn't bend under pressure, but rises in it. I met their neighbor once, an old woman named Maryam. She had lost 3 sons. 3. And when I asked her how she still smiled, she said, "They are with Allah." What better place could they be? I couldn't respond. My throat tightened. I felt so small in front of her, not because of what I lacked in tragedy, but because of what she held in faith. That's the thing about Gaza. You expect to find victims, but you find warriors. You expect to find hopelessness, but you find light, not in grand speeches, not in miracles, but in the eyes of a child offering you the last piece of bread, in a father rebuilding his wall with bare hands, in a mother praying not for revenge, but for mercy. They changed how I pray. I used to only pray when I needed something. Now, I pray because I witnessed people who had nothing, but still thanked God like they had everything. I saw how Islam wasn't just something they practiced. It was the reason they were still standing, still smiling, still loving. I think of Zayn often. His voice still echoes in my head. Don't forget us. I haven't. I never will. In fact, I see him now in every child who asks questions about war. I see him when people scroll past news from Palestine. I see him when someone says, "It's complicated," and walks away. No, it's not complicated. It's human. And that's what they showed me, how to be fully human in a world trying to make us numb. I remember before I left, Khalid walked me to the edge of the neighborhood. He gave me a stone from the mosque rubble and said, "Take this with you, not as a souvenir, as a reminder that from ruins believers rise." I keep that stone on my desk now. It sits next to all my expensive equipment, and it humbles them all, because it carries more truth than any lens or microphone I've ever owned. I went to Gaza with 1,000 questions. I came back with one answer: faith. Not blind faith, not fantasy, but the kind of faith that breathes in fire and refuses to die, the kind that makes mothers fearless, fathers unshakable, and children radiant even under siege. That Muslim family in Gaza taught me what the news couldn't, what textbooks won't. They taught me that Islam isn't in the headlines. It's in the hearts. It's in the way they protect their dignity, their neighbors, their prayers. It's in how they mourn and celebrate, how they bury their dead and still find reason to say, "Alhamdulillah." They didn't just change my opinion, they changed my direction, my focus, my soul. I now look at Muslims not with curiosity, but with deep respect. I listen to the Qur'an not as a foreign book, but as a voice that once rose from the ruins and carried me out of ignorance. This isn't just about Gaza anymore. It's about every place in the world where people are tested beyond what most can imagine, and still choose faith over fear. It's about every Muslim who wakes up in a hostile world and still says, "Allah is enough for me." This story doesn't end here, because every time I tell it, another heart awakens, another mind opens, another soul begins its journey. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Khalid and Fatima hoped for all along. They didn't need fame. They didn't want pity. They just wanted to be seen, to be remembered, to be known not for their wounds, but for their unwavering love of God. And now I carry them with me, in my prayers, in my words, in my changed heart. May their light reach you too, and may their strength inspire you, and may their faith remind you that even in the darkest hour, there is always a light that refuses to go out. That light was in Gaza, and that light lives in me now. Jab script ek powerful point par kam hodi hai bina kisi summary key to wudala dimadano mean gunji rethi hai. Akri laughs viewers Cudfield Cartagena, Ani spoon feed Karna Zorori na hota.